Things just feel a bit lighter these days. I'm not going to tell you why, but I'm fairly certain that you can guess as to why. There just seems to be a weight off of my shoulders. Off of everybody's shoulders, probably. Anyway, that's not what I'm here to talk to you about, Muse, because you don't want to talk about such nonsense. You want to talk about art. The craft of art. Specifically, the craft of writing. I have something to chat with you about today, as I usually do. I just, a couple nights ago, finished Fear 3. Whee! The third book in the series, at least the first draft of it, is done. It wound up being a little longer than I expected, and that's fine. Just more fun to be had. What I want to talk about with you today is something that kind of popped into my head as I finished the last sentence of the book. In the back of my head, I thought, did I deliver a good enough finale for this book? Not the series, because the series is going to keep going, but for this book. It was just a simple thought. It was a quick dash of energy across certain synapses of my brain that made me go, was it good enough? Was it big enough? Was it bold enough? Was it brash enough? And then, of course, I let it go. And then the next day, I began to ponder this idea again, as I am wont to do. And it bugged me. And then I had to ask myself, why does it bug me? What makes a good ending for a book? So I thought I would talk to you about that. Now, here's the thing. A lot of people assume that the climax of a book has to be this huge barrage of stuff. That the big bad, the ultimate big bad, has to come out, and there's a huge battle, and somebody in the end wins. Now, here's the thing. Here's the way I look at that now. I don't necessarily think I used to think about this way, but I do now. The problem with that train of thought with endings is it becomes monotonous. It becomes a pattern. And you all know how I feel about patterns. If you continue writing books that way, readers going to look at your book and go, okay, here's how it's going to work. They have survived the previous issue, and they've got this maybe a new way of doing things. And that new way of doing things is going to happen and happen and happen. It's going to build up, and then there's going to be an inciting incident that kind of throws them off course, and then they're going to be led up to another big battle, metaphorically or literally, to a bad guy, to the new big bad for this particular book. They win, they go on. And then all of a sudden, it becomes like the monster of the week. And it's how we used to describe the X-Files at one point in time. Because it felt like every episode was really just a monster of the week. They had a new monster they had to deal with. They fought him, they beat him, they moved on. So when you start approaching every one of your books as if the climax of the story has to be this huge thing that your characters overcome, it becomes predictable. It's just like every book is this, and this. It's a roller coaster. It's a roller coaster, but it's only one segment of the roller coaster, and it just happens over and over again, over and over again. So I gave that some thought, that idea, that possibility. And I realized that what I had done, what I had written as the climax of Fear 3 was exactly what it needed to be. And I'm okay with that. Because here's the thing. This is especially when you're dealing with a series of books. When you're dealing with a series of books, you've got this long arc, the series arc. And you hope that the series arc builds like this. And when you get down to the very end of the series, it's going to have this ultimate climax that's going to end. But if you keep throwing the same thing at the end of these books, if there's just a new big bad, here's what happens. You have the first big bad in the first book in the series, and that first big bad is pretty bad. And then you realize that for the second book in the series, you've got to up the ante a little bit. So the big bad becomes even bigger and badder. See where I'm going with this? So the third book, you get to the big bad for the climax, and the big bad has to outdo the previous two big bads. So it becomes even badder and bigger by a factor of 3. So by the fourth book in the series, it's by a factor of 4. So by the end of the series, your characters may as well be fighting an omnipotent, omniscient being. And they can't beat that. So the end of the series is, well, my characters all die because they couldn't beat the omnipotent, omniscient being that had to happen because I built it up that way. Sometimes the climax of a story doesn't have to be a big bad. Because you know that there are specific plots that I think Socrates or one of those Sophocles or one of those Clees created. It's man against man, man against myth, man against self, man against nature. I can't remember the rest of them. But those are kind of the plots. So you don't have to have man against big bad. It could be man against self or woman against self. See what I mean? And it becomes counterintuitive and counterproductive of you to start falling into those patterns. Now, let me give you a little secret on how I craft a book. Just one book. Now, this book could be in a series, or it could be a standalone, but it's just one book. I make it very clear to everyone, because I'm a very transparent writer. Not transparent as in like one-dimensional. You know what I mean. I don't keep secrets. The way I write a book, besides the cause and effect, the butterfly effect sort of method I use to write my books, as I write, and I've said this many, many times, as I write, I picture the movie of the book in my head. And if I'm writing and I can't seem to see the scene in my head, that means something's wrong and I have to go back and fix it. But that's not my point. My point is this. I look at each book. This is kind of a big thing for me, I think. And I've never really said this out loud. I look at each book as a season. Okay? So you have an entire series of books, right? Like my iZombie series. There are 13 books in that series. Some of them are novellas. Some of them are full-length novels. Some of them are spin-offs like the Zombie Radio series. But that's an entire series. Each book in that series is a season. Right? Now, each chapter in that book is an episode. So each chapter has its little mini climax and its little mini denouement, its little mini inciting incident. And they all vary in size and scope. And everything drives everything forward. So each chapter of each book is an episode, right? So you have, let's just say, let's keep with the iZombie series. So the iZombie series, 13 season series, right? iZombie I is season 1. Chapter 1 in iZombie I is the first episode of season 1 of the iZombie series. Chapter 2 is episode 2 of the first season of the iZombie series. Chapter 3, episode 3, chapter 4. You see what I mean? See what I'm going at? Now, I don't always have the same number of episodes in each season. Sometimes there's smaller amounts, sometimes there are larger amounts, sometimes the chapters will be longer, but you can look at the evolution of my writing from beginning to now. At the beginning, my chapters were shorter, right? And as I started to develop this technique, my chapters became longer. Now my chapters range from 3,000 to I think there's a chapter in Fear 3 that veers near 10,000 words. That would have probably been a cliffhanger. That would have been a 2-episode cliffhanger. But because of how I started working with my books and the technique that I eventually developed, the chapters by nature had to become longer. Because I was effectively fitting a full hour-long episode into each chapter. And each chapter, each episode in the book had to build up to the season finale. But if you go back and you watch your favorite television shows, each season, the really good ones are not predictable. Right? They're not predictable. And it's when a television series starts to become predictable, it loses its quality. And people start questioning why they're watching it. So you've got to throw a curveball into it. And sometimes that curveball is a climax that might seem like an anticlimax. See what I mean? You've got to avoid that repetition. And you can't always assume that every climax has to be this gigantic experience, this gigantic episode. You can't just throw everything at this final episode of the season and expect readers to just be, oh, okay, I get it. Because they're just going to start, not only are they going to start expecting those climaxes to get bigger and bigger and bigger, or they're just going to be able to predict them. You don't want your readers to be able to predict what happens in your books. And so sometimes you've just got to let a climax not be so grand, not be some Wagnerian finale. Sometimes it might need to be a Chopin finale. Sometimes it might need to be a Stravinsky finale. You see what I mean? But this, of course, is all opinion. It's how I do it. How you do it might be different. And that's great. You might like the predictability of the monster of the week. That's okay. Just make it yours. Make it your process. Make it your style. That's what's important. For me, mixing it up a bit is really important. Throwing the readers a curveball is really important. Keeping them on their toes. Making them wonder what's going to happen next. And it's absolutely crucial that no matter what you're throwing in to the mix, it needs to serve the story. So if you throw a massive climax at the end or a subtle climax at the end, it's got to serve the story. Whether it's the season or the series, it's got to serve it. Anyway, that's all I got, Muse. That's it for now. Of course, next week we'll be back for another conversation. Who knows what it'll be. Anyway, beta readers will have Fear 3 very soon. And guess what I'm doing next? That's right. I'm going to start on my gothic ghost story for Devil Dog Press. I'm excited. Can't wait to get back into the creepy. Moo-ha-ha and all. Anyway, Muse, thank you for listening to me. Thank you for inspiring me. And thank you for just always being there for me. Because you make things awesome.